Was town meeting a consolidation of public opinion?
Or were choices made among competing ideals? I'm Greg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello, and we are the Unselects.
So Brian,
Yeah.
did you do anything for Thanksgiving?
Well, we had a dinner with the family, which was great. And then I stood out in the cold and I yesterday brought in 1,800 signatures for a ballot referendum in Shrewsbury.
Hold on a second. 1,800 signatures.
Over 1,800.
Now, when you say ballot referendum, what are you talking about?
Well, at town meeting, there was a vote on the MBTA Communities Act. Under our bylaws in Shrewsbury, the citizens can get together and they have to gather a number of signatures through a ballot initiative process in a very short period of time. In Shrewsbury, it's roughly 1,350 signatures that were required, and they have to be certified by the town as people that live in town. A group of people got together, including myself, and we went out and collected those signatures over the Thanksgiving weekend and a little bit before.
And that was about which article?
That was Article 9.
Article 9.
Which is the article on the MBTA Communities Act.
Excellent. So we will go into that. We're going to go back to town meeting here. And we want to talk about how did we get to a point where we needed a referendum. And we're definitely going to talk a lot more about the details of the process of referendum and why it would be in our bylaws. So first, let's go back to town meeting. And actually, I'm going to go back, as we talked about in the last episode, I did have a petition for converting the planning board from an appointed board to an elected board, Article 10. And I spoke in front of the select board. So I'm going to go back to a clip here from Michelle Conlon questioning me on comments I made regarding town meeting members. So let's take a listen.
I just have to say, in defense of the people that represent our community in town meeting, I wholeheartedly disagree with the fact, the statement that you made that they are uninformed decision makers.
I didn't say all, right? Some. And if you look at our attendance, I would argue that I'm correct. That if you look at attendance, I guarantee you one day, well, not guarantee, my prediction based off past data, we would have 33% of the town meeting members not show up. We've had town meeting members who don't show up for town meeting for 3 to 5 straight nights of town meeting. I would argue that's not very engaged and connected.
Okay, well, I made a prediction.
Yeah.
there. So let's see if my prediction came true. I said there, I thought, 33% wouldn't show up. That was my prediction.
Correct.
Let's look at the numbers. Okay, there was actually 184 town meeting members that did show up. So I was actually wrong on the percentage. However, as I mentioned, I don't think they're very engaged and connected. There's still 52 town meeting members who didn't show up. So the one thing to note too is there should be 240 town meeting members, but if you do the math there's actually only 236 there. Another point on the right, I think it's important to note, and I think this would be something I would definitely talk about, let's say, as the town election comes in the spring. I've highlighted again the violators, where we have between, if you've missed 8 in a row days of town meeting, 7, 6, and 5. So those who are like 67% or more truant from attendance at town meeting, these are the people that probably shouldn't be town meeting members moving forward. I mean, would you agree that the number one job of a town meeting member is to attend town meeting?
Yeah, it's roughly 2 times a year. Sometimes they're special, right? But
Right.
That's it, right? You have to come in, you have to show up 2 nights. And if you can't do that, I think, as we talked about in a previous episode, you really shouldn't be on town meeting.
No, you shouldn't. The other point of note I will make on this is that Precinct 5 actually has 25 town meeting members. And I don't know why, because what it's supposed to be is there's 10 precincts, 240 members. Math would be 24 members per precinct. And some reason, there's 25 in Precinct 5. So I think there's some things we need to look at, maybe have a conversation with the clerk about how is that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I want to make a note here is I'm going to go back to town meeting because I want to take a look at Article 6. The process at town meeting is most of the time it's a voice vote where you just essentially the moderator will say, those in favor say aye, those opposed say nay. And usually you can tell up or down who had a larger number of people voting. If you don't know, or you can't understand, or if people question the vote, then you can actually ask people to stand up and we physically count. The first physical count of people was Article 6. And I want to show this just because I want to make a point here on that number we just showed from an attendance standpoint. So let's take a listen.
On the matter of Article 6, 151 in the affirmative, 20 in the negative. Article 6 passes.
What we said there was 151 in the affirmative and 20 in the negative. So that's 171 people.
Yep.
Well, we just said that there was 184 in attendance. What happened to the others?
Well, they either abstained, which seems weird because your only job as a town meeting member is actually to vote on these articles.
Yep.
Or they left.
Yeah, I wonder.
Or
yeah,
something else happened.
I mean, I wonder, right? And I don't know if I could prove this, because I didn't sit there, but because the town, which I appreciate, has done a much better job. They've actually started posting town meeting attendance on the website so you could see it. If people know that now, do people really show up, check in, then leave?
It's quite possible. It's a long night.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to be called out, which we've done. We've called out folks that have certainly not showed up quite a bit, the scofflaws.
Certainly.
And it might be a way around it, right? Now, we've talked about we should have an electronic voting system ultimately that is assigned to the town meeting member. But that's a good example of why we should probably have that.
Absolutely. And actually, I do appreciate the select board after the town meeting had a Tuesday night in their meeting specifically spent some time talking about that. It said, a lot of the feedback was, that the whole standing vote is kind of, it's not efficient, it's confusing, and having some type of electronic device would give you more accountability. So I think that's something I hope as a town that we're able to kind of move towards, because I think there's a lot of benefits to that.
Well, it also holds folks accountable, because if you're voting for a town meeting member and I don't know how you vote, I might be voting for somebody that actually, if I don't know them,
Right.
why? First of all, I shouldn't be voting for people just by name. I should understand their what they stand for. But this makes it much easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to jump into Article 9, because Article 9 is what we talked about. That's what stemmed the referendum. So let's go back and look, because there was two pieces of this. And the reason why we're going to spend a little bit more time is when we were talking to a lot of people in the community after town meeting, there was a lot of discussion around the debate surrounding Article 9, and specifically about this mixed use definition change that was proposed, that was brought up related to Beal. Now, we had brought that up as part of our town meeting preview. We talked about it. So let's go back and listen to what we said about it, and then we'll see how it manifested itself at town meeting. In that bylaw, right, the language is really what guides certain provisions that, I had some challenges with. And one of the main ones, which I want to take a dive into here, is not specifically related to the 3A MBTA piece, but it's related to something else that's happened in town. And I want to talk about it because it was not mentioned. And I think a lot of people in town would be curious about it. So let's take a look at this first. They're changing a definition of vertical mixed use for mixed use development. This has nothing to do with MBTA, and I know what it has to do with, and I'm going to tell everybody. Because what this is about, it's about Beal. It is not about 3A compliance. And let me explain how this is about Beal. So that's what we had said ahead of town meeting, right? And I think there was some discussion about it. It wasn't something that was discussed at the planning board public hearings. So let's go back to town meeting and see how this was actually discussed as part of that article debate.
We took the opportunity, as I said at the Finance Committee, and I'm happy to say again, as we went through the permitting process with the Beal project, which you're referencing, we saw an opportunity to clarify our definition. So we did that.
So it does relate to the Beal project, and you did see an opportunity to refine the definition that directly impacts the zoning of Beal, correct?
It does impact the zoning where Beal is.
That's correct.
Now, the reason why that point was made, I believe, was because in the prior discussions, the town was articulating that it was really about clarifying a definition because mandatory mixed use or mixed use development, vertical mixed use, occurs in other zoning districts throughout town. It wasn't purely on Beal. And that was, I think, the first time that people may have heard town manager saying, no, it does actually impact Beal. So after that, let's say admission, or at least conversation about that, this carries on. So let's go back and listen to how this conversation keeps going.
The 2 public hearings on this article at the planning board, who recommends zone changes, it was never discussed. It's 3 paragraphs hidden in a 15-page motion. And I don't know how you can expect every one of these town meeting members to know and understand and research the implication of 5 words and what it means to the community. And then what's going to happen 3 or 5 or 7 months from now when everybody figures it out? You're going to say, town meeting voted for it. They authorized it. We simply brought it before our legislative body. Stop the blame game.
Come on, guys. Let's stay focused.
Now, I know some people weren't happy about, say, the tone, but I think what I wanted to talk about those comments was made some very valid points as far as how the process works, because you mentioned that this was not discussed at the public hearing. So if they're going to bring up a zoning change, it's something that should actually be articulated. Why are we changing the zoning? Who does it benefit? What are the total implications? And they didn't even talk about the definition change at a public hearing. So what is your thought about that?
Yeah, well, it brings up a lot of concerns, right? I think the gentleman that was speaking, asking the question specifically, was asking legitimate questions. If it's not brought up, you get a tone that it could be sort of a bit of obfuscation, right? And the idea that what is town meeting supposed to be? It should be a place where we debate and we have vociferous debate, passionate debate. You can disagree with the gentleman on how his tone was, but where else are you going to bring that issue? And if you're passionate about something, you have to bring it up at town meeting. And town meeting shouldn't be a place where everybody gets together and just agrees, right? That's this is the problem with a lot of people have, right? It's the backroom deal. Everybody sort of agrees on everything, and we're all going to be really nice to each other. We should be obviously respectful, but we have to hold people accountable. And this was the place to hold them accountable.
Yeah, and I think I'll make a few comments too. In the process of town meeting, attending a few, watching a few, and it kind of goes back to that. You get a perception right from the outside that it's well choreographed, where the outcome is predefined in a way, right? I think that they believe the outcome's predefined. Yeah. So you already know which way potentially a lot of these articles are going to go, and I feel as though the town tries its best to ensure they get the outcome, which primarily is a yes on everything if they want you to. Right. They have the initial hearings. There's a finance committee meeting which talks about that. There's planning board hearings which talk about specific articles. The select board talks about them. And those are the opportunities that I wish more people would take advantage of to actually go and ask more questions, because when you get to town meeting, the problem I see is that if you have the attendance like we do, where people aren't 100% committed to saying, I'm going to dedicate the time. If it takes 6 hours, I'll spend 6 hours. If it's 2 days, if it's 3 days, this is my role. This is what I signed up for, and I'm going to go through this and ask every question. Unfortunately, you don't see that, right? And one of the things you see, and we're just going to go to the last part of this clip, is that there's some other good points about town meeting process that I want to share based off of what was said at town meeting. So let's go to that clip.
Paul, one more follow-up so we can get some others in, please.
This is an important matter, Mr. Moderator. I've spent several years on it, and this is very, very important. And I can appreciate that. You know how that works. Someone's going to move the question, and it's going to be sayonara.
The process, right? He mentions move the question. So those of you who don't know, this is kind of it's parliamentary procedure, but it's based off of town meeting time. It was like a book that was written in, I don't remember what year it was, but the guidelines, right, of how the meeting's supposed to work. So you can talk about something, but if somebody says, hey, I want, move the question, I vote to move the question, and if everybody agrees, that means you can't talk about it again. So the concern is that before everybody can voice issues, concerns about questions, debate, like you talked about, they can move on and go right to vote for it without having people the ability to clarify and really make sure that they really understand how they're going to vote and why they're going to vote. Fair?
Yeah, and there are scholarly articles written about this very issue in 19th and 18th century New England, right? We talked about this earlier. And what you found is town meetings were there really for the town fathers, the leaders, a group of people that already agree on a certain thing, to sort of quiet those that might have a differing opinion.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a perfect use of this. There is to your point, there is a group that knows that they want to go in a certain direction. The town wants to go in a certain direction, and they know the procedure. Move the question. They're going to get enough votes to move the question, and it shuts down debate. What this gentleman was saying is, I know how this works, right?
Right.
And good for him, because he actually got his point across, right? And that was important. I think people feel sometimes uncomfortable with discussing issues. They feel like, are you being disrespectful?
Right.
And I think the issue is, when you're passionate about something, you need to have some respect, but you also need to get your point across. And in a situation like this, knowing what would happen, did his best to actually get
Right.
that point across.
Right. And I think you saw that, and we're going to go here to the kind of the response to the tenor of those comments from the select board. And I want to really talk about this because I don't necessarily agree with the way that this was handled. So let's take a watch.
From my perspective as a select board member, there is zero accuracy in the accusations that Mr. Zikos is making. Was any of this related to the litigation regarding Beal, or was this in response to our initial plan was mandatory mixed use? We removed the mandatory mixed use, but we wanted to still invite mixed use development where we could, to align with our strategic plan of economic development.
Okay, the biggest problem I have with it is the last part of what she said, and then I'll let you comment on the first part, is she's not being accurate. The question was, should we change a definition of mixed use in our zoning bylaw? There was no adding or taking away of mixed use. So making a correlation to economic development and strategic plan is inaccurate. They were modifying a definition to protect themselves from Beal litigation.
Yeah.
And it's like they're digging a bigger hole instead of just admitting it up front, saying, yes, we thought this was the best move for the town. Some might not agree with it, but this is the way we want to go. The other piece I would like to get your take on is what she said first, where I think she used the term, there's zero to do with Beal, right?
Yeah.
0.0.
0.0.0. I think it's a public statement by a elected person, right? I think it's inaccurate. I think, first of all, we don't know really what went on,
Right.
but we do know there is a likelihood that this was changed in order to protect the town that's in litigation. And maybe she wasn't aware of that, but I think it puts a person who's on the select board into a position of saying to a citizen, I know better than you, right? Don't tell me that this happened, because I know better than you. And you're up on the stage, you're above everybody else, you're looking down on them. I think it sends a bad message.
Right. And I think the first comment, the way she opened, was as a select board member.
Yeah.
Right.
Not a town meeting member.
Right. Not as a resident, just like you, as your neighbor.
Yeah.
Right. It's this separation of power, right? Power and control. Like, I'm above the stage. I have my viewpoint's more important. I'm not saying that's what she's saying. I think this is what the perception can be, right? When you watch it, and subliminally people take that. So that was her comments. I want to go on to see what the select board chairman, Mr. John Samia, said about the same topic.
This isn't about Beal. This isn't about Mr. Mizikar. There's no better public servant than Mr. Mizikar. He has worked for us since he's been here in 2017. There is no public servant in our Commonwealth that's more transparent. I think as a community, it's important, and Mrs. Deering said this earlier, it's important to have dialogue, discussion, but not personal attacks here or social media or otherwise. As a community, that's not who we are. It's good to have debate. We can agree to disagree, but let's do it in a way that's not impugning character.
So I do agree that the fact that we need to be able to have debate, let's debate. We don't always have to agree. We shouldn't be impugning character. So a lot of what he said, 100% agree with. No questions about that. But the only one thing I'm just curious about is there a transparency index?
He's so transparent that.
I mean, yeah, I get that what you're trying to say is the most transparent, like more transparent than others, is like not something you can really measure. I think like his behavior or what you would hope that you aspire to say as a public official, as the town manager, my goal is to ensure that I'm as transparent as possible with the public. I get that.
Yeah.
But the problem with saying that is the reason why he had to make the comment is because there's a perception of a lack of transparency that should have been addressed, I think, a little bit more direct.
Yeah, let me speak in hyperbole and virtue signal. Right? I mean, I think that I understand the point. We like the town manager as a human being.
Absolutely.
I think he's a nice guy. But I think that, again, going back to issues around this topic, there is passion, and it feels like there was a lack of transparency.
Yep.
And the buck stops with the town manager and with the select board, and you should be able to challenge them. You may not like it, because what I felt that the chairman said was, we can all agree to disagree as long as we end up doing what we want you to do.
Yep.
Which is not the point.
Yes. So what ended up happening after this debate is there was a proposed amendment. Because of a lot of focus on that definition change, there was a proposed amendment to remove it. And so we're going to go now to that vote on that amendment to see how that came out.
On this matter of the amendment, we have 91 in the affirmative, 73 in the negative. The amendment is adopted.
Right, so by adopting the amendment for Article 9, they removed the definition change as part of our zoning bylaw. And then we went on to a little bit more debate specifically on now the MBTA compliant zone. Not going to show that a lot of that debate. We're just going to go to the vote to see how the actual article came out. It was another standing vote, so let's take a watch.
On this matter, 123 stood in the affirmative, 50 in the negative. Article 9 as amended stands. It is passed.
So the article passed, which means we would be adopting a compliant 3A zone. This leads us back to where we started tonight.
Yes.
With the referendum. So at what point, I guess, during that night, did you think, hey, maybe we should do this referendum thing?
There was a lot of points. I felt that when we really listened to the debates, I felt there could have been more debate. They did move the question once again. It was getting late in the night and people get antsy, and they moved the question. So I don't think everything was answered or discussed. I know people that obviously voted yes felt like it was, but I think there was more there. And I also think that people have an opinion based on what the town tells them to have an opinion on in the town meeting. That's what we've been learning. And I felt that, what if the whole town has the opportunity to really make an opinion on this? This is a big issue. We've talked about it a lot. It impacts the schools. It impacts taxes. It impacts traffic. It impacts public works. So many things. And I don't think enough debate is had on it. And I want folks in town to be able to have the time to research on their own and make a decision for themselves. Many other towns did that. And because of that, many other towns did not adopt. We also should bring up, it's not technically a compliant zone yet. There were still some issues from the EOHLC that the town still has to do in order to make it compliant. So we actually voted on a mostly potentially compliant zone.
Right, until you submit it and you get feedback, you don't really know.
Right, and then the SJC.
Right.
This is in front of the Supreme Judicial Court, the Milton case. They're not ruling till February. I think it's just too soon to, and a lot of the folks that talked, that's one of the things they said, can't we just put it off?
Right. There was actually a opposition presentation at town meeting.
Yep.
So a town meeting member, Caroline, who was here with us, so obviously in full disclosure, when we talked about this, in that SJC clip that we showed in our town meeting preview was also shown to town meeting, which actually I thought was a pretty powerful clip because it allowed people to see that there were some very good questions and about how those guidelines that really guide a lot of the 3A compliance are in fact probably regulations and maybe, found as such. So the messaging really at town meeting was, hey, there's like a pause for cause, it could be a no for now, but let's wait until we absolutely know what we have to do by, mandate or by law before we go ahead and just push this forward. So I kind of agree with that to say, you know what, why don't we take, I guess, the tools, or use the tools that were at your disposal as part of the democratic process to go into this referendum. So let's look real quick here. We won't keep this up too long because it's an eye chart, but this is section 16 of the Acts of 1953. I think it's 553, so it's and this was talked about too, because it's part of Article 10. Kevin Mizikar went into this in detail. So it's clearly in here, the highlighted section. So within 10 days, so at town meeting, any article does not go into effect for 10 days. So you have that window in which, if you get 5% of the signatures of all registered voters in Shrewsbury, that you can actually take that question to the body at large, or all voters in town. And the reason why you do that, I think, let's talk a little bit about the difference between representative democracy and direct democracy.
Yeah.
So if you go back, what we have really, our primary form of government, not only here in the local level, but federally, is representative. You go to the poll, you hire somebody to represent you, House of Representatives, right? The Senate, and they are the ones who actually are going and voting on your behalf. A direct democracy is where you, as a individual person or a voter, would vote on a specific issue. We saw that in Massachusetts, the questions, right? So last we had, the questions on the ballot as far as the state auditor, or, legalization of the mushrooms and the MCAS. Those are a direct form of democracy. So what you kind of like is, because we have a representative town meeting of only, 32 other towns, I believe, that if those representatives don't indeed, or if the perception is of the majority of the town, or 5% of the town, that they're not carrying out the will of the people, that the people then get the chance to vote.
Yeah.
Am I right about how I'm explaining that?
Absolutely, 100%.
Great. So I'm glad it's in there. So, when people, look at this referendum process, it's something that's not used a lot. It's really important to know the reason why it was put in there. It's really put in there to protect the citizens from, I guess technically the government, to say that if there's people who are in the representative body who now are not listening to those who they're supposed to represent, the people, it's like, when in doubt, default back to the residents.
But what's interesting is these ballot initiatives, specifically around MBTA, are happening quite frequently in Massachusetts now.
Yes.
Right? Because what we've seen is town meeting members, as we see pretty low turnout in reality, are not necessarily listening to the people, right? They're listening to the bureaucrats who are telling them to do this certain thing. Because in the past, that's sort of how it worked. You would trust the bureaucrats to think for the town, and then you would say, okay, everybody agrees on this, I'll vote for it, right? That's changed over the years we've seen, in other episodes, right, where we talk about overdevelopment in town, right? The town seems to be very pro-development. And I'm not anti-development, but I want smart zoning, smart development. And I think what happened was, in our conversations, getting people to sign this document were really, really great, right? Some didn't even know about it, but a lot did, and said, geez, I think I'd love to be able to vote on this. Yes or no? But I want to research it a little bit more myself.
So let's talk a little bit more about those conversations, right? I mean, I was out there with you.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously people probably saw us, so it's not like you're like, oh, I wasn't there. No, I was there. And it was, like you said, I think the best part of it was just to be able to have that many conversations with residents who really didn't come, in most of the time, to the store, right? To the grocery store primarily. They weren't expecting the conversation, but you kind of see it. It was, you get a whole feel for the town. Some people ignore you, which you understand.
Yeah.
Other people, just are happy to have a conversation and want to be heard. And obviously these conversations took many, many paths, right? I talked to a couple of people for almost like a half an hour, right? You were just shocked about all kinds of topics, which was great, because in reality, what better way to really understand what are the issues in town that are important to people than to go directly to the people and ask. And I think far too often we rely now on sending out a survey, or we send out a flyer, or you go to the website. This is how it used to be. You would go down to the town square, you would start having a dialogue and you would talk to people face to face. And I think that's just so lacking today in our society. And that was what I thought I really enjoyed, was just that sense of community, and those conversations and the personalities we met was unbelievable.
And I know we're going to show a couple of clips right after this, but it brings up the town square, right?
Yeah.
The town square in most New England towns don't actually exist anymore, right? And it really is the supermarket. It's the local stores that people go into where people congregate. So yeah, while there are people that obviously walked by, and people obviously not from Shrewsbury, over 2,000 conversations, well over 2,000 conversations were probably had by the group of people that were getting signatures. And they were usually really positive, right? And people that even were for the MBTA Act signed and said we should have a vote on it, because I believe in citizens having a right to speak about a major issue in town. I loved that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and the one thing I do want to get into, because we learned a lot, right? A lot of observations, you learn about legal issues, and fascinating to me. So one thing we learned, right, is that there is a constitutional right in Massachusetts to collect ballot signatures for either a ballot initiative or to get a name on a ballot. Why do we know that? Well, a little side story here. I won't go into it too detailed, but it was always a question of people, you know, somewhat complaining, I think, well, why are people standing outside stores? And maybe we won't name the store, but it might be a store you might go to for, you know, things around the home, building products, and might have an orange sign. But I do want to share something with you, and it's a real quick note here, and that this is, and it stemmed from 2 Supreme Court cases. We're going to talk about the most recent one in the Massachusetts State Supreme Court, where it says, you know, it protects, the Massachusetts Constitution protects the right to solicit signatures on commercial private property, right? Not on just public, but that's what the case actually said around shopping centers and so forth. So back to your point, we're actually going to go to the case. It's Glovsky versus Roach Brothers, where Glovsky was running for governor's council, which is the position who helps select judges. And he personally represented himself in front of the Supreme Court. But let's hear what he says about, to your point, the role of grocery stores today in our society.
Yeah.
In general, the concept of supermarket has included every aspect of daily function that used to be a part of our downtowns, and is the one place that people routinely go.
So it's the one place people routinely go. It's actually replacing the functions of our downtown.
Yeah, and by the way, great props to the folks at Price Chopper in town. They were wonderful to us because they never questioned, you know, just made sure we didn't block the exits and entrances, which we didn't, and very helpful.
Yes.
Plus they had coffee and food, which was great for hanging out there all day.
Sure was. The last clip we want to look at here is this comment, actually by a Supreme Judicial Court judge here, and the balance between kind of private interests and this whole sense of democracy. I think it's a good clip to look at quick.
I thought your other claim was essentially a question of the rights of property holders. But doesn't that come down to a question of what is the price of democracy? I mean, is it too much to ask for a large supermarket holder to let somebody stand in front to, not to be on a soapbox and give speeches, but simply to obtain signatures so they can get in the ballot?
So I kind of want to leave with this question to you. What is the price of democracy? And the reason I ask is that I've seen on Facebook, there were some comments regarding the referendum process and that, oh, this might cost the town $20,000. How do you relate that to this concept of the price of democracy?
Yeah, I think it brings up a good point, and the justice kind of nailed it, right? If we think about major issues that impact all of our lives, there are some issues that are big enough where we should all have a say in how that impacts us. And the small price to get a special election, when we see what actually is passed at the town meeting, a $10,000 floor, multi-millions of dollars to get a partial engineering drawings for a town hall, right? It's a pretty small price to pay to all of us to understand an issue and have a say. Now, the majority could vote yes, that's fine, right? But I think that we should be able to have that say, because this is so important to our citizenry, right? An engaged citizenry is the most vital piece to our democracy. And I think that this showed that. And I think people will ultimately want to speak on behalf of themselves.
So, in closing here, what can the people expect? What's the next steps in this process?
Yeah, so basically, we brought over around 1,850 signatures. We needed about 1,350 to pass the threshold. The town clerk will certify those signatures. Basically, they look at the voter rolls and make sure people actually live in town. Once they're certified, they're then sent over to the town manager's office and the select board's office. They will then set a date for a special election. We don't know that date. From history, to give an example, Milton did the same thing. It happened to be in December as well. When they turned in early December, their election was held about mid-February or so. Interestingly enough, mid-February is when the Supreme Judicial Court is also likely to rule, on the Milton case about this very law.
Yeah, and let's hope that ruling comes out before this election, because it would be a lot of clarity for the voters of Shrewsbury,
for sure,
who are going to go out and vote. So to everybody out there, make sure you go out and vote. Pay attention to when the election is. We will obviously keep you updated on anything related to this referendum process, because it's never happened before in Shrewsbury.
That's the other
ever.
piece. Yeah,
Right.
This is historic. This has never been done in Shrewsbury before, never even attempted. It's in the bylaws, but nobody ever attempted it. So credit goes to the voters who jumped on this, and we're looking forward to talking about it in the next few episodes.
Excellent. So until you see next time, which we're going to talk a little bit about another article in town meeting, and hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Let us know if you have any questions about the process or the referendum. You can always do contact at theunselects.com. But until next time, I'm Greg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello, and we are the Unselects.
Thank you.